Good morning, everybody. First, I would like to thank Pros that to give me the opportunity here to speak, to share my ideas about revenue management and revenue management in the future specifically. Maybe first a few words about Karl Consulting. I don't need any slides. You see the entire company here on the stage. It's just one person. I decided to work a little bit on my own for the last few years in my career. I used to work in revenue management for Swiss Airlines and Lufthansa Group for almost like 25 years. And with that, I had a lot of opportunities to talk with pros, to share my ideas and to influence also how the development of revenue management actually had to be. Before that, I used to work in theoretical physics. So don't worry, I will not bring too many formulas. I have to bring a few formulas though. But interestingly, I worked in quantum field theory. I just heard in a talk before that quantum computers will be maybe the new thing which is going on. So I had to quit quantum because I couldn't make a living out of it. So maybe I have to ask my employer here that I could go back to the field and join a little bit back the quantum opportunities. So what I want to talk about is now how revenue management may change if we change the distribution paradigm. So I take the point of view here that suppose we do have NDC now. I mean, it takes a while, it's not here yet, it will be very difficult to achieve it, but suppose NDC would be here. So what would that do to revenue management as we know it? And what is actually the paradigm here is that revenue management as we know it, I believe, is just looking like we know it because the distribution capabilities were as they were. But what actually happened is that in the meantime, some very remarkable development happened. What we have witnessed, what is now here, is the internet. And what the internet really is, and what it does to all our lives, and specifically also to revenue management, is still not entirely clear now. So for example, here, you see it's 1993. For example, there was this cartoon here. On the internet, nobody knows that you're a dog. The idea was, I mean, you have a privacy, you can basically consume all the information. That was in 1993. That's the idea, maybe. Internet was very fresh in those ages. And we all know that it's maybe not quite what it is, because actually, it's not so that nobody knows that you're a dog. In practice, there are many actually who not only know that you're a dog, but you're familiar with your age, breed, illnesses, tastes, and dog food, right? So that was a very interesting article in 2003. It was right after the first .com bubble here. There was a very nice article about how internet really influences our life or our buying habits. In those times, originally one also thought that selling over the internet would be maybe something like auction. All people would do auction, was a big word. But actually, it's not quite that. I think what happened is a lot about what about data, privacy, economics, price discrimination. These is things which are going on. People actually give the data, and data allows you to do a lot of things in the selling process. And this development actually has continued. We had things like Facebook, Google Maps, iPhone, WhatsApp. The data trace we leave in the internet is ever increasing. I mean, you start with your age, breed, illnesses, tastes, but with Facebook, you know who your friends are. With Google Maps, you know essentially where you move around on Earth. With iPhone, it's a constant economy and data stream here. WhatsApp, what you talk to your friends. So the point is actually that the more data is available about you, the more opportunities there is actually to do what we call technically price discrimination. Price discrimination is very, very important for the airline pricing and revenue management practices. I say price discrimination, maybe discrimination is not so a good word nowadays. It's an economical term, but you could also say maybe, let's say, price differentiation. And the core of price differentiation is that not everybody pays the same amount for a good or service. And the price differences is not really explained by cost. It's more like the idea of price discrimination is actually the one who has more value from a product has to pay more. Actually, it's a very socialist idea, actually, because the one who derives more value should also pay more for the good. And we actually believe that price discrimination is at the core, at the heart of the phenomenon that we see that the airline industry delivers a public service and is usually not government funded. So the service level the airline industry provides, we believe, is only possible because airlines do price discrimination. That means the one who has more value from the product pays more than the other. So that allows actually to have lower prices, that allows the phenomenon what we've seen today, that everybody can fly everywhere to a very good price, right? It's not so that every flight is cheap, because some have to really pay more, but it is so that everybody can afford to fly. And this mass transport phenomenon, I think, is only possible because airlines practice price discrimination. Before that, actually, there was a regulation. The airlines basically were basically colluding on the prices, and they were talking to each other and basically made the prices according to the highest cost and stuff like that. Before that age, the flying was not so cheap. Not everybody could fly, and the deregulation actually caused competition, and the idea was that prices would come down. But I mean, there was another thing going on. Prices did not only come down, but prices actually started to become very, very varied because airlines practice price discrimination. And I think price differentiation or price discrimination is actually the core economic driver for all we have seen here in revenue management pricing. So how would airlines actually then do this price discrimination? As you know it here, the airlines actually do what we call like fair rules. I mean, you do price differentiation. We say if you book early, then you get a cheaper price. If you stay Saturday night, you get a cheaper price. And all these kind of things lead to different prices. But what it also leads to is that you have a second phenomenon actually coming on. As soon as you start to charge different prices for your same product, you have to be careful not to run into the following problem, that you sell all your seats too cheaply. And that actually posed quite a problem in the early days of airline, let's say, distribution. And this is, how would you switch off a fare product of a given flight? If you think about it, I mean, I think you can actually publish fare rules. You can say this fare is valid 10 days before departure. This fare is valid if you have a Saturday night stay. The fare is valid in that period. But this kind of would be kind of difficult to say. And this fare is not valid on the flight number X epsilon on that specific date. I think you cannot really write that into the fare rule. So I mean, how would you actually really switch off a fare product from a given flight? Because what you have to do is you do have to maybe at some flights when you have high demand, you have to really switch off certain fare products, because otherwise you will sell all your seats at too cheap. And this is how the airlines actually invented booking classes. It's a very, very clever trick, actually, what they did. They said, well, look, let's make a condition to buy the cheap fare product. The condition would be you need a reservation with a specific type. And you can actually, with your reservation system, you can limit the amount of reservations you can make on a given flight. So on each flight, I can basically then limit the amount of reservations you make for a specific fare type. I think that was very, very ingenious, and you would call it nowadays actually the actual practical implementation. I think it is dynamic pricing actually. Because why do you want to switch off a certain fare product from a given flight? It's because you believe demand conditions are such that you can sell all the seats to the higher price. And that's essentially the nature of dynamic pricing, that you can actually change your price according to demand conditions. That can be very, very fast. Suppose you have a given flight, you have some amount of seats, and you book a large group. Suddenly you realize you have much less seats available than before. And then you think, oh no, because I booked this large group, I cannot sell the cheap fares anymore on that flight because that would be a waste. So you can actually change the prices for the public customer instantaneously with kind of a mechanism. And the mechanism actually the airlines invented here is the, let's say, the GDS mechanism, or the publication mechanism, which you see here, that the airlines actually did not only do dynamic pricing very early on, they also created something which we would call nowadays e-commerce or something. You have to think that it was end of the 70s, early 80s, where the airlines started to sell their tickets via a computer. In those times, actually, the computer was not known to most of the people. It was before the PC arrived to the people. So it was not the concept of really selling something via a computer. It was an entirely new concept. And that was, in my opinion, a very remarkable fact. So here we see the traditional way how the airlines now started to distribute. They created, well, I could say that was very innovative. They created the GDS. GDS were very innovative in those times, because they allowed for the airlines to outsource the selling process to the travel agents. So they put the computer terminal into the travel agent's office, and the agent then could basically get two important informations. One is about the fares. What are the fares? What are the rules? I mean, when can I buy that fare and that fare product? This is essentially implementing price discrimination. And then the other part was the availability. And with the availability, that's very interesting, because the availability was more like a dynamic principle. The airline could almost like instantaneously switch on and off prices or fare products on any given flight. And in order to do so, the airlines had to work together, because it's not one airline could, well, some major airlines in the US actually started to do so. They could build these things on their own. In Europe, it was more like that some groups of airlines formed and they built together, they built this so-called GDS. And of course, they had to agree on the rules and how the pricing mechanism works. And this is what we still see today. The airlines actually started to define the rules and the standards, how the price would be calculated by the GDS machines. Of course, the problem is a little bit that the price mechanism is outside of the airline. So that means you need a lot of control mechanism, was the fare calculated correctly, and all this kind of thing. So this whole mechanism actually just was there to implement what the airlines want to do. It is price differentiation in its purest form. And the kind of way how the airlines did it was really shaped by the possibilities they had with the computer system, how this would work. And as it often happens when you are let's say you do something very early and you develop a technology, you get kind of stuck onto it. This technology was developed in the, let's say, end of the 70s, early 80s, and remarkably, it's kind of still there under the hood. So what we think about revenue management, what we see is essentially just shaped by the technology we had here in those times. So the question is now we all the airlines, they strive to introduce new distribution technology. The buzzword here is NDC. The NDC initiative was actually created to break this kind of this lock here, this lock in the old technology. I mean, how do we really, as a whole industry, get into the new age of internet distribution? Because as innovative as airlines were let's say in the 80s with the host computer system, in the meantime, the internet developed and it basically overtook the whole mechanism, the whole process. It overtook the principles with completely new possibilities, like internet, the distribution, e-commerce, the Amazons and whatever developed. And the airlines basically could not exactly follow. Of course, the airlines did do some, let's say, some sort of internet web distribution, but the problem was still that the mechanism of the GDS distribution and how the prices are calculated, how the availability is calculated, of course, was still the same old mechanism. So what I claim is that the two basic principles, price differentiation and opportunity cost, that means not selling too early, too cheap. If you can sell later on, you have higher opportunities for later on. These two principles will survive. They are the core principles. They are the core mechanism on which whole airline revenue management rests. But what's going to happen is that with price differentiation, it's very important is that the information you have about the customer dramatically increased. So the opportunities for price discrimination with internet distribution are completely different from what we had in the old GDS world. In the GDS world, the airlines essentially put their fare and their availabilities and everything, you basically throw it over the wall and you have no idea who is using it on the other side. You have no direct contact with the customer. But with internet distribution, you are much closer to the customer. You are in an online type of interaction and conversation. You have a lot of possibilities actually to get information about the customer. So nowadays we speak about personalized pricing, so basically personalized product offering, let's say even more. So personalized product offering can only do if you really see the person or if you know the person around it. So what I think is that price differentiation will come to an entirely new level with the possibilities of the data we know about the customer. Now, the opportunity cost, essentially, what I try to argue is this is dynamic pricing, essentially, because if you have opportunity cost, you try to sell higher than the opportunity cost. And the airlines invented just the booking classes as a concept to essentially slow down the bookings or to eliminate low-fare bookings if you can sell all the seats at a higher fare. For that, actually, you don't need booking classes, because if you get a request from a customer here, you can just check your opportunity cost and then you can adapt your price code accordingly. So there's no really need to do booking classes, because the booking classes are only there as a mechanism to affect the switch off of a fare product in the GDS world. But if you get requested directly, you can just adapt your price here according to what you think your opportunity costs are. So the new paradigm, actually, the NDC distribution process would say, like in a web, on a web server, you get the request for a price quote or for an offer. You get an offer request, and then you can just respond with a priced offer. And then the customer will select what actually he would like. And you can make actually this offer very, very specific to all the information you have about the customer. So what will that do to our revenue management here? The mechanism is that you will not have the outside public rule engine. So each airline actually will have their own private rule engine, which would respond to the offer requests. The idea is we do that with an NDC standard. The idea was actually to create a standard of communication which you could use for your direct connect. You could use it for your .com if you want. You could use it for your partners, for interlining, and you could use it actually for GDS distribution systems. And the point is actually that the customer information through all those channels would actually be able to travel through the whole distribution into your own system. So you will have rich customer information which you can use to put your prices and offer in front of the customer. So what is very important is that you are freed up from the public rule mechanism. So the problem was in the old world, all the airlines had to sit together and they had to define all these rules, and you could imagine that the process, how you develop new products or new ways of doing the pricing, was very, very cumbersome. This will be gone. Now, what you actually can do is you can do your own ways and rules. Each airline can do their own ways and combinations on how they would actually create the offer. So the question is still now, how will revenue management work in such a world? And in order to get the glimpse at it, I think you have to really understand, go back to the basics. So revenue management is not really about availability. It's not really about fare levels, fare rules, and so on. It's not about this. So if you go back to the roots and look at the problem, is that you see that what you have to do is, what price should I charge for a given offer? That's the basic question. So you can essentially forget about everything you know about availability, about fares and rules. Essentially, the basic problem is just a pricing problem. How do you price the product upon a request? That's what you have to solve. And in principle, the problem is what prices you charge is a well-known problem in economics. I mean, everybody knows that if you charge higher prices, you will get less bookings or less requests. If you charge lower prices, you get more bookings. So demand is actually a function of the price, and it's a falling function. It will fall with the price in general. There's a few exceptions to that, but they're not really worth mentioning. So the economical problem is relatively simple. We can actually go to the economics books on 101, and they say, pricing, how should I really price a certain request? And one problem is really about the whole question about availability sometimes comes. Even nowadays, we hear sometimes, well, dynamic pricing is you first get the availability and then do a dynamic price. What I try to argue here is now, dynamic pricing or the pricing without booking classes is essentially the same thing as we did with booking classes, just looked a little bit in a different way. Where would actually the dynamics actually come from? So if you have, this is actually, you don't really have to understand this whole stuff. This is at the core of the availability calculation. So the availability calculation, sometimes people think you calculate how many seats you have available. But behind the availability calculation is nothing else than a simple economical principle here. And this goes like this. Suppose you had only one seat left, and you would expect some bookings of a high fare, like 500. Would you sell it for 250 now? And not really, because if I know I will sell it later for 500, I will not sell it for 250. If you have 2 seats left, for example, you would say, well, even 2 seats, the second seat I will not sell. Only if I have about 12 seats left. So where your actually expected bookings from high fare is roughly 50-50, so you could sell it for 250. And this is behind the availability calculation. So the availability, as we know it, is already kind of some sort of a financial calculation. It has nothing to do with how many seats you have or not. The availability itself is actually just basically trying to calculate whether it's better to sell a seat now for 250 or whether you would wait for higher demand. So this is at the heart of revenue management. But you can look at it in 2 ways. I mean, you can look at it either in saying, okay, I only will reserve here in that example 11 seats here for the high fare, and if I have only 11 seats, then I will close the booking class on the lower fare. If I have more than 11 seats, I will make this available to the low booking classes. But you could look at it in a dual way. You just say, I will sell at a certain price if it pays more than its cost, its opportunity cost. So if I'm having 12 seats here, the opportunity cost is 250 in that example, and you would say, okay, I'll sell it for 250 right now. If you have like 27 seats, your opportunity cost is almost zero. You would say, no, of course, I would accept any type of fair product. And this is actually the way how you would generalize it in a world without booking classes. In a world without booking classes, you would essentially just say, what are my opportunity costs? If somebody tries to offer, if I get an offer here that is higher than the opportunity costs, I will actually sell it for the given price. And this is also where the dynamics comes in, because the dynamics in pricing only comes in my opinion, via the opportunity cost. Because you see, this green curve, or the opportunity cost curve, depends on how many seats you still have. So suppose now you would, out of some reason, I don't know, because your equipment is downgraded or because you have a group booking or whatever, you would actually, this would occur in time, and suddenly you have much less seats left. Your price would go up because your opportunity cost would go up. If the group would cancel or something would happen, you would actually have suddenly much more seats, and then your price would go down. This is where the dynamics comes in. So in essence, dynamic pricing is what in all the terms is availability. So it would change your availability if you have a different expectation on how many seats you still have. In a dual way, or in a dual view, it just say your opportunity cost changes. Another topic is here that in the old world, let's say, you had this separation, that price differentiation was done by fairs and rules. In that simple example, you only have two fair products. One is for 500 and one is for 200. And the model is that the demand is essentially just independent. You have customers buying 500 and customers buying 200. Why would they do that? Are they silly? No. Because you put some fair rules on the 250 fair. You would put some, like Saturday night stay. Certain customer cannot actually affect the Saturday night stay, so they would have to buy the higher 500 fare. But in reality, of course, the thing is a little bit more difficult. So going towards dynamic pricing, and if I have my opportunity costs not really like just saying 11 seats and that's the cutoff, I just essentially charge the opportunity cost directly. I can even reduce the demand by just raising the prices. So in the older model, the point was actually that they're saying, well, you have demand at 500 and you have demand at 250, and they're completely separated. Of course, in reality, this is not true, really. I mean, if a person or a passenger comes up or a customer and sees 500 and 250, or it tries to get the 250 fare. So I could of course raise the 250 fare and then reduce the demand. So, but the essence of all this is that it's essentially the same equation, which has been valid for decades now for revenue management by calculating the availability. At the same time, gives us a value here of our expected opportunity cost. And this is a very important part of the pricing equation, because our original problem, what price I would charge, is essentially solved by the following equation. Now here's an equation here. Economics 101, I mean, what is the optimal price? The optimal price is where your marginal revenue equals marginal cost. But the marginal cost essentially, of course, is when you have taxes, you have variable costs, is almost sort of negligible. The most important piece of your cost term here on the right-hand side of the equation is your opportunity cost. And that is where the dynamics of the pricing comes in, because opportunity cost will depend on how much capacity you still have left. If you suddenly have less capacity, opportunity cost will rise. And opportunity cost actually reflects what you expect to get for that resource in future time space. So as time goes by, your opportunities go down. So opportunity cost will go down as time passes because you have less opportunities to sell. Opportunity cost will go up if you lose capacity, because if you have less capacity, you have less opportunities to sell. So that's the essence of the dynamic pricing equation. So what I claim is availability will be replaced by the simple opportunity cost term. And what will happen upon a request, you have to solve this equation optimally for each online request. You have to solve that equation. The left-hand side is another interesting quantity. So what we say is marginal revenue equal marginal cost. This is the economics 101 equation for the optimal price. And revenue management is essentially a pricing problem. So on the left-hand side, you have the expression for marginal revenue, because what is marginal revenue is essentially how will my expected revenue change if I sell more or less quantity. To sell more seeds, I have to lower the price. So then I get more sales. So marginal revenue measures essentially how the revenue will change if you change the amount of quantity sold. And interestingly, it is not really just the price. If you want to sell 1 unit more, you cannot just sell 1 unit more at the same price. You can only sell 1 unit more if you lower the price a little bit. And this is this price elasticity term. So what this equation just says is the expression for the marginal revenue is the price minus price divided by price elasticity. That means if you have a high price elasticity, here you would actually not really put so much margin on top of the costs. And your online request machine or your pricing engine or your private fair rule engine or whatever you can call it has to solve this kind of equation for each request. Now, of course, price elasticity is a little bit hard to estimate, but actually there's some cases. It depends a little bit how you think how your demand function actually works. You demand some simple demand functions actually say that the optimal margin is just a constant. So if your optimal margin is just a constant, essentially it's very easy here what your dynamic price should be. It's basically tax plus variable costs plus opportunity costs plus some optimal margin which you have to calculate. This is essentially what you have to do, and if you replace the whole revenue management with booking classes and fares and products with the new dynamic pricing equation. So this is the transformation, how revenue management will actually be transformed. What was fares and rules for price differentiation will become segmentation and price elasticity estimates. Opportunity cost, instead of booking classes, you will just directly plug in the opportunity cost into your pricing engine equation. So it's not so that you have to, I mean, sometimes you hear, yeah, dynamic prices, you adjust the price dependent on whatever kind of things like load factor and so on. The load factor actually is buried in the opportunity cost. So this also allows actually to actually split the roles here. I mean, in the future we see, in my opinion, we see 2 roles here. You see the pricing analyst roles. It's basically just trying to understand the customer demand in terms of price elasticity. And we see the capacity controller role, which essentially has to calculate the opportunity cost, which of course involves forecasting what the future demand and everything should be. So the real benefit you get if you can really divide these 2 roles into 2 almost like independent type of forecasters, so there will be no single forecast anymore. You need actually for both kind of roles, you need 2 different type of estimates. One estimate would be what is actually the price elasticity for the requester in front of me. You have much more information. If you get a request from a customer, you have a lot of information available what this customer might be and what his willingness to pay might be. You have much more information than you can really put into a forecast and for the future. So essentially the pricer role would be to estimate the willingness to pay and the price elasticity based on the information which sits in the request. And this information can be now much richer than we use traditionally for the forecast. To calculate the opportunity cost is actually kind of like a different problem. It's similar more to today's, as I said, it's like similar to availability, but it has to do more with the forecast. It's the future, essentially. And then you calculate the bid price, which reflects the future demand. Now, you see that the problem is, if a customer stands in front of you, you see the customer history, you know, the name, everything. So you know a lot about the customer. But it's very difficult to say, will this customer in 10 days book? So the future is much more unknown. So what I can, by disentangling these two equations from, one is the price elasticity, what should be the margin or the willingness to pay of the customer standing in front of me. I can use all the information I get around the customer which is here. While on the other hand, I cannot really forecast whether Mr. Miller will book on the 17th of May in the morning at 5. I cannot forecast that. All I have to know for the price elasticity estimate is just, I have to know what to do when he stands in front of me, when the customer request is here. And this disentangling, I believe, has a lot of advantages here. It can actually is susceptible to all new kinds of techniques of A/B testing. You can use machine learning algorithms for estimation, so on. While for the bid price calculation, you can actually use more or less standard forecasting methods like we had already before. The only thing you have to remember is what was the availability in the old world, which has become a cost term in your dynamic pricing equation. You can, of course, also extend this. For example, one was one of my favorite. Here, price consistency. What is wrong with that picture here? You get one for 20 cents, you get two for 15 cents. It looks very silly, actually. But what happens is that in airline pricing, this is very common. You have actually, sometimes a return fare is really lower than the one-way fare. So if you have the one-way fare on the left-hand side, the return fare costs less than the one-way fare. Of course, you can buy the one-way fare and the return and throw it back. But suppose you have solved the problem here, and then you have actually done very nice one-way fares here, but then you have another problem that two one-way fares might undercut your return fare. And this is actually a problem which is almost impossible to solve today. It means that you don't have one-way fares, and then a round trip undercuts the one-way, so you have only a very expensive one-way fare, and then the round trip undercuts, and usually the people, they will buy the round trip and throw away the return couple. If you introduce one-way fares, then you have the other problem, two one-way fares undercut the round trip fare. And this is almost impossible to avoid today. But in the new world with dynamic pricing, it's actually relatively easy to solve that problem, because you just understand the return fare as a bundle discount on two one-way fares. So you can make everything consistent by just saying, well, the interesting part is that the opportunity costs are usually, they add up. So you have just to add up the opportunity cost of the outbound, of the inbound, and you just put on top you put the margin, and you give a bundle discount on two one-way fares. And this concept actually can extend to more complicated itineraries, because once you go through airline pricing, you have things like ODs, you have stopover, you have side trips, and so on. How would you all solve that in a dynamic pricing world? Actually, I claim it's relatively easy. All you have to do is you just add up your opportunity cost, which gives you a cost term, and then you have to place basic some kind of margin on top. And the margin on top you can just understand as something like a bundle discount on whatever the single unit prices you have. So you say, today round trip pricing would be, okay, I buy two one-way flights, but then I give a bundle discount on top of the round trip fare, and then you have all these price consistency problems are gone. So this can be extended actually not only to flights, you can extend it to arbitrary resources. Just makes the equation a little bit more complicated, but it's still the same equation. You can actually include it even to ancillaries. You have expected ancillary costs and so on. You can actually extend it very nicely. So doing all this, the question is how do we get there? And I found in the internet this very nice thing here. We have to change the standard. We have to change from the old world to the new world. How do you change from an old standard to a new standard is not so easy. For example, you cannot suddenly start to drive on the left-hand side of the road if you're alone. It's very dangerous. And to really do some kind of a standard change, there's an example in Sweden where they actually, overnight, they changed from left drive to right drive. It's called Högertrafikomläggningen. They had to actually change just from driving from the left-hand to the right-hand side. But this is very, very difficult, and it was the biggest disruption they had actually in Swedish history here. And what I claim is it will not be possible here in the airlines to just switch from the old world to the new world in one big bang overnight, because everybody in the whole world would have to change. So the real tough problem is actually, how do we live in the intermediate period where you still have booking classes, fares and rules and stuff, and you still want to do dynamic pricing or the modern internet channel. And the idea and the basic concept is, what you have to do is you have to calculate your availability from the same box as you try to calculate your dynamic price. So it's very, very important that the same mechanism behind which calculates the opportunity costs and everything has to be also applied to calculate the availability. Because if you solve the problem of creating a price without booking classes, you can also solve the problem of creating a price with booking classes, because it's just the same problem with the restriction that you can only put prices on a discrete level. So this is essentially the concept. You need to create your dynamic price out of the availability box, the same availability box which also creates your standard dynamic price and the availability. So you can then actually even do something like channel consistency. What is if you have a discrete price on the GDS, you have a continuous price here on your box. What you can do is that if you calculate it by the same optimality principle, it is so that the discrete price will always be somehow a little bit below or above your continuous price. So what you can do is actually you can formulate your continuous price as some kind of a discount of a public price, and you achieve here channel consistency, because the least thing you want to have is that you say, I have now my direct channel or my direct NDC distribution channel, I do dynamic pricing, but if it becomes more expensive than what you have in the GDS, I think this is not really what you want to do. So at the same time, I would say the evolution towards online segmentation and independence from a GDS, you have actually this, you start here with leg system, then you do introduce OD availability with seamless availability, but there's a very interesting intermediate step. If you are able to do dynamic pricing, everybody nowadays thinks of doing dynamic pricing with kind of prices without booking classes, but in essence, if you can solve the problem of dynamic pricing in a continuous fashion, you can also calculate the dynamic price which is optimal for the discrete price points. That means you can go to dynamic pricing here, which I call the OD price, dynamic pricing carrier, by just switching on the correct discrete price point. And actually that brings a lot of benefit, and usually I think this is a little bit misunderstood. Everybody thinks to go to dynamic pricing requires all kinds of things like NDC or requires whatever kind of new distribution channel. You can already in the current world, by switching on the correct discrete price point, effect some dynamic pricing. So I would see that as an important step. And because of price consistency, you have to anyhow do that, and that would actually enable certain mechanism already much earlier, because you don't really need to solve all the problems, how we do the ticketing, how we do the fulfillment, how we do the ADP co-distribution of this. And I know, I mean, from my experience, what we had with certain airlines, we had quite a big success in Swiss Airlines to actually do this dynamic pricing with discrete fares. And I would see that as an important step here towards the final goal, where we do the online dynamic pricing. And with that, I would like to close, and thanks a lot.